Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
It all started subtly, like a hairline crack in a perfectly painted wall. Sterling Heights, with its manicured lawns and quaint streetlights, looked like a postcard. Newcomers, usually wide-eyed young families or retirees seeking peace, would comment on the quiet streets, the well-maintained community pool, the annual block parties. I moved here 5 years ago, drawn by the same picture, thinking it was just another suburban dream. My name's Alex, and at first I just wanted a decent place to live, a quiet life. I'm not one for grand gestures or crusades, never have been. I'm an accountant, so my world revolves around numbers and logic, things that usually make sense. What was happening in Sterling Heights, though, defied all logic. The cracks started showing when I tried to volunteer for the neighborhood watch. It was a casual thing, just offering to help organize a few patrols. That's when old Mrs. Albright, bless her heart, told me that they're very particular about who gets involved in certain things here. Her eyes darted away as she said it, a quick, almost imperceptible glance towards the stately brick house at the end of the cul-de-sac where our HOA president, Mr. Harrison, lived. I shrugged it off then, thinking it was just small-town politics. But a seed was planted. Then came the first community meeting I attended about the deed restrictions. It wasn't on the main agenda, it was always tucked away at the very end, usually under new business, other. I remember sitting in the plastic folding chair in the Sterling Heights Community Hall, listening to Mr. Harrison drone on about budgeting for new asphalt and the finer points of shrub height regulations. My attention drifted, like most people's, until Ms. Davies, a retired history teacher with a fire in her belly, stood up. "Mr. Harrison," she began, her voice quivering slightly but firm, "we need to discuss the restrictive covenants, specifically Article 4, Section C." A hush fell over the room. Everyone knew what she meant. Article 4, Section C. The clause that explicitly stated, "No person of Negro blood or extraction or of Jewish descent or of any Asiatic race shall be permitted to own, lease, or occupy any lot in this subdivision." And it went on, listing other groups too. It was like something out of a history book, only it was still printed in our current bylaws, right there in the thick binder I'd received when I bought my house. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. He was a man who looked like he'd been carved out of granite, all sharp angles and unyielding expressions. "Ms. Davies, we've been over this. The board acknowledges the sensitive nature of that particular clause. However, as we've repeatedly stated, it's legally unenforceable. Federal law supersedes it. It's purely historical." "Historical?" Ms. Davies retorted, her voice rising. "Mr. Harrison, if it's historical, then put it in a history museum. Not in the living documents that govern our community. It's an insult. It tells prospective buyers, it tells our children that this community still holds those vile beliefs." A murmur went through the room, a mix of agreement and nervous whispers. Some nodded vigorously, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I just watched. My own reasons for being there were complicated, more layered than simple outrage. I had my own research to do, my own quiet observations. The board's obstinacy, while infuriating to most, was to me a peculiar puzzle. I wanted to understand why they held on so tightly, not just the surface reasons, but the deeper currents. Over the next few months, the murmurs became a roar. Civil rights organizations got involved. There were letters, official demands, and eventually public protests. Small at first, a dozen people holding signs on the main road leading into Sterling Heights, then larger. News vans started showing up. Our perfectly manicured lawns were now backdrops for angry residents and concerned citizens, holding signs that read "Hate has no home here" and "Erase the bias." I attended every one of those protests. I stood shoulder to shoulder with Ms. Davies, with the young couple, Wendy and Ben, who had recently moved in, shocked by the discovery of the clauses. I held signs, chanted slogans. I even spoke a few times, carefully crafted words about the importance of inclusivity and the damage this clause inflicted on our community's reputation. People saw me as a dedicated advocate, someone fighting the good fight, and in a way I was. But my fight had an extra dimension, a secret purpose that was slowly solidifying in my mind. The board, led by Harrison, remained unyielding. Their excuses evolved, but the outcome was always the same: no removal. "It's too costly to amend the entire master deed," Mr. Harrison would claim, his face impassive. "Legal complications," echoed Mrs. Jenkins, the board's secretary, a woman with a perpetually pinched expression and an unshakable loyalty to Harrison. "We'd have to go through a complex legal process. It's just words on paper," added Mr. Davies, no relation to Ms. Davies, a meek board member who rarely spoke above a whisper but always voted with Harrison. It's not like we actually enforce it. This last argument always made my blood run cold, not with anger, but with a strange sense of confirmation, just words on paper. That phrase held a particular resonance for me, because sometimes words on paper, even unenforceable ones, still carried immense power. One evening, after a particularly stormy meeting where a lawyer from the National Housing Alliance had laid out the clear legal precedent for removal, I stayed behind. Ms. Davies and Wendy were packing up their protest signs, defeated but not broken. I lingered near the board table, pretending to help tidy up. Mr. Henderson, one of the newer board members, a man in his late 50s with kind eyes and a perpetually worried frown, caught my gaze. He was the only one who seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the situation. "Alex," he said quietly, walking over. "Rough night. Tell me about it, Mr. Henderson," I replied, keeping my voice low. "It's like talking to a brick wall." "Don't they see the damage they're doing?" he sighed, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. "They see it all right. Just not the way you or I do. Harrison, he's got his reasons, deep reasons." This was it. The opening. "Reasons beyond cost and complications?" I asked, trying to sound genuinely curious, not probing. Mr. Henderson leaned in, lowering his voice even further. "Look, I shouldn't be saying this, but there's something more to it. It's not just about history to Harrison. It's about the original documents, the true foundation of Sterling Heights. He believes if we start tinkering with even the unenforceable parts, it could unravel things. Legally speaking." I feigned confusion. "Unravel what? It's a simple amendment. Lawyers have said it." "It's not simple," Henderson insisted, glancing nervously around the emptying hall. "The original charter, the one from the 1930s, it's layered. There are clauses, connections, conditions. Harrison is convinced that if that particular article is severed, it could invalidate other more fundamental agreements tied to the initial land acquisition. Things that go back generations. Things about land rights, water access, even some long-forgotten tax exemptions that benefit the community." My heart skipped a beat, but my face remained neutral. This was exactly what I'd been digging for. Not just the racism, but the hidden financial and legal entanglements. "Tax exemptions?" I asked, trying to sound mildly interested, not overtly so. "Yes, exactly," Henderson whispered, relieved to have someone to confide in. "There's a small, almost invisible clause that links certain historical restrictions to the community's right to a specific water source, and a perpetual tax break on the community land. It was a deal made back in the day when Sterling Heights was first planned. Harrison argues that if we legally acknowledge the invalidity of one part of the original founding document by removing it, it could open a Pandora's box. He's afraid some descendants of the original landowners, or some opportunistic legal firm, might use it to challenge other parts of the original agreement and claim back land, or revoke those tax benefits. It's all interconnected, apparently." He shook his head. "I've seen some of the legal opinions he's had. They're complex. He has a point, a narrow, legalistic one, but a point nonetheless. He sees himself as protecting the community's financial future, even if it means protecting a horrible piece of its past." "So he's not just a bigot?" I asked, letting a little surprise into my voice. Henderson sighed. "I think he's a product of his time, sure. But his motivation here, he claims, is about protecting the community's assets. He says removing it, even if it's the right thing to do morally, could bankrupt us with legal fees and lost resources. That's what he says to the other board members behind closed doors." This was more than I'd hoped for. "Are these legal opinions public?" "No," Henderson said, shaking his head. "He keeps them locked up, board only. He says if they got out, it would give ammunition to anyone looking to challenge us." He looked at me, a flicker of genuine concern in his eyes. "Look, I just want the right thing done, Alex. But I also understand his fear, irrational as it might seem to some. He's stuck between a rock and a hard place." He paused, then added, "There's a sealed box in the board archives. It contains all the original foundational documents, the ones from the 1930s, and all the legal opinions Harrison's commissioned over the years about this exact issue. He rarely lets it out of his sight. It's his ace in the hole, he calls it." Henderson lowered his voice to barely a whisper. "It's in the locked filing cabinet in the back office of the community hall. Only he and Mrs. Jenkins have the keys. But sometimes, on a Tuesday when he's at his Rotary meeting, Mrs. Jenkins leaves early, and the hall manager, old Mr. Peterson, is off early too. There's a narrow window. If someone were to just peek." He didn't finish the thought, but his meaning was clear. I felt a surge of something, not anger, but a cold, calculating resolve. This was it, the exact kind of opportunity I needed. I smiled faintly. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. For everything, he nodded, a weary man trying to do good. He couldn't know that my interest in those community assets wasn't about protecting them. It was about something entirely different, something tied to my own family's history, and a debt I intended to collect. The next Tuesday, as the sun began to dip, painting the Sterling Heights sky in hues of orange and purple, I found myself walking casually past the community hall. The timing was perfect. Mr. Peterson's beat-up sedan was gone. Mrs. Jenkins's sensible compact was nowhere in sight. Harrison's Cadillac was predictably absent. The front door was usually kept unlocked until a certain time for various evening clubs. I slipped inside. The hall was silent save for the hum of the old fluorescent lights. The back office door, surprisingly, was ajar. A single small key was hanging from a hook on the wall just inside, almost hidden by a dusty old calendar. It was too easy, almost too easy. I took the key, my heart thumping a strange rhythm, not of fear but of anticipation. I knew exactly which filing cabinet Henderson had described. It was a dark steel beast, standing like a sentry in the corner. I inserted the key, turned it, and with a soft click, the top drawer opened. Inside, nestled among stacks of old meeting minutes and dusty ledgers, was a single heavy wooden box bound with tarnished brass straps. On it a faded label read, "Sterling Heights Foundation Documents, Classified." I reached for the box, my fingers brushing against the cool, rough wood. This wasn't just about deed restrictions anymore. This was about unlocking something far deeper. What secrets did Sterling Heights truly hold? And what would I do with them once they were revealed? The thought sent a shiver down my spine, a thrill that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with a long-awaited reckoning. The wooden box felt surprisingly heavy in my hands, as if it contained the accumulated weight of generations. The tarnish on the brass straps seemed to whisper forgotten histories. I carried it carefully to the worn wooden table in the center of the office, placing it down with a soft thud. My hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as I unclasped the latches. Inside, beneath layers of yellowed tissue paper, lay a stack of documents brittle with age. The smell of old paper, dust, and forgotten ink filled the air. The first document was a master deed from 1932, handwritten in elegant looping script. It detailed the original subdivision of Sterling Heights. I skimmed past the familiar racist clauses, my eyes searching for something deeper, something Henderson had hinted at. And then I found it, buried within legalese so dense it was designed to obscure. A smaller, almost unnoticeable addendum, dated just weeks after the main deed. It wasn't about tax exemptions directly, but about land acquisition. It detailed the purchase of the vast tracts of land that became Sterling Heights from a family, the Petrovs. My breath caught in my throat. Petrov, my great-grandparents. This was it, the very name I had been searching for. The reason I had moved to Sterling Heights in the first place, not for a quiet life but for answers. The document claimed the Petrovs had willingly sold the land. But I knew the family stories, whispered down through generations, stories of coercion, of being forced off their fertile land for pennies on the dollar, threatened with spurious legal action and violence if they didn't comply. My great-grandfather, a proud man who had built his farm from nothing, had died a broken man shortly after. The official story was a fair transaction. The family story was theft, disguised as legality. I kept reading, my eyes scanning for any loophole, any detail that confirmed my family's version of events. And there it was, a clause stating that in the event the Petrov family, or their descendants, ever challenged the sale or attempted to reacquire the land, certain restrictive covenants, including those explicitly barring specific ethnic groups, would be immediately and permanently enforced. It was a chilling revelation. The racist clauses weren't just general prejudice, they were a direct targeted weapon, designed to ensure my family and others like them could never return, even if they somehow proved the initial injustice. It was a failsafe, a legal padlock on a stolen inheritance. Further documents revealed the true nature of the tax exemptions Henderson mentioned. They weren't exemptions for the whole community, but a permanent, incredibly favorable tax status specifically for the initial development company, Sterling Holdings LLC, which was owned by the very same families who formed the first HOA board. They had built Sterling Heights on stolen land, then secured perpetual financial benefits, all while using racial discrimination as a shield. Harrison's family name, an almost identical variant, was among the primary signatories. He wasn't protecting the community's assets. He was protecting his own family's ill-gotten gains and the dirty secret of Sterling Heights' true origins. I spent hours poring over the documents, cross-referencing names, dates, and property descriptions. Every faded line of text screamed injustice. I copied everything meticulously on the old slow copier in the office, making sure I had digital and physical backups. It was almost dawn when I finally closed the box, replaced the key, and slipped out of the community hall, leaving no trace of my presence. The postcard image of Sterling Heights was now completely shattered, replaced by a dark, ugly truth. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week, a special session called by Harrison to address the persistent agitation regarding the historical covenants. He probably thought he could weather the storm, dismiss the concerns, and ride it out as he always had. He was wrong. I arrived early, carrying a worn briefcase, not a protest sign. Ms. Davies and Wendy were already there, organizing their signs, their faces etched with familiar frustration. They gave me a hopeful nod, thinking I was still on their side, fighting for the same cause. And I was, in a way, but my battleground was now completely different. The community hall filled quickly. The media was there, alerted by anonymous tips I'd sent, promising a major development. Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Jenkins, and Mr. Davies sat at the board table, looking smug and composed. Mr. Henderson sat slightly apart, his worried frown deepening as he scanned the crowd. Harrison called the meeting to order, his voice booming. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here tonight to discuss, yet again, the matter of our historical deed restrictions. The board reiterates its position. These are unenforceable." Before he could continue, I stood up calmly, decisively. "Mr. Harrison," I interjected, my voice clear and steady, cutting through his rehearsed speech. "With all due respect, perhaps it's time we discuss not just the enforceability of these clauses but their origin, and the true reasons for your board's insistence on keeping them." Harrison's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Jenkins gasped. Mr. Davies looked like he might melt into his chair. "Mr. Alex, this is hardly the time for baseless accusations," Harrison said, attempting to regain control. "You are out of order." "Am I?" I asked, walking slowly toward the front of the room, my briefcase in hand. The quiet buzz of the crowd intensified. People leaned forward, sensing a shift. "I believe I'm perfectly in order to discuss the foundational documents of Sterling Heights. The ones you claim are purely historical, but which in fact reveal a much darker history." I opened my briefcase and pulled out the copies. Not just the racist clauses, but the addendum, the original land transaction, the details of Sterling Holdings LLC, and the permanent tax benefits. I walked over to Ms. Davies and Wendy, handing them copies. Perhaps Ms. Davies, with her keen eye for history, would like to read something aloud from these historical documents. Ms. Davies took the papers, her brow furrowing as she scanned them. Her eyes widened, then hardened. She looked at me, a flicker of understanding and something akin to awe passing between us. She grasped the implications immediately. Wendy, too, gasped, clutching her husband Ben's arm. This changes everything," Ms. Davies whispered before raising her voice. "Mr. Harrison, this document states that the original land for Sterling Heights was acquired from the Petrov family, under threat of legal action, and with a clause explicitly designed to keep their descendants out forever. And these tax benefits, they're not for the community, but for Sterling Holdings LLC, owned by the very families who founded this community, including yours." A pandemonium erupted. People shouted, demanded answers. The news cameras flashed. Harrison stood up, his face ashen. These are falsified documents, a smear campaign," he roared. But his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Falsified?" I asked, my voice still calm, cutting through the noise. "Then why are they stored in the sealed foundation documents box in your locked filing cabinet, Mr. Harrison? The one Mr. Henderson just so helpfully described to me." Mr. Henderson recoiled, looking shocked and betrayed. He hadn't intended for that detail to be used against the board in such a public way, especially not by me. The crowd turned to him, then back to Harrison, the accusations swirling. "This is a personal vendetta," Harrison cried, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He has no right to these confidential papers." "Confidential," I challenged, pulling out another document. "This is a public record, Mr. Harrison. Or rather, it should be. The true records of how this community was built on a lie, on the systematic dispossession of families like mine, the Petrovs, whose land was taken to build this ideal community. The racist clauses were just a smokescreen, a second layer of defense for a massive generational fraud." The word fraud hung in the air thick and heavy. The meeting devolved into chaos. Residents, once united by the desire to remove offensive language, were now divided by a far deeper, more unsettling truth. Their homes, their community, was built on a foundation of injustice. "We need an independent investigation," someone shouted. "This is outrageous," another cried. Harrison, Mrs. Jenkins, and Mr. Davies were surrounded by angry residents and aggressive reporters. They stammered, tried to deny, but the evidence I had laid out was too compelling, too specific. Ms. Davies, her face grim, was already on her phone, likely calling her network of civil rights lawyers. Wendy and Ben looked devastated, their dream of Sterling Heights turning into a nightmare. Within days, the story exploded beyond the local news. National headlines screamed about racist HOA's dark secrets revealed. Lawyers swarmed Sterling Heights. Lawsuits were filed, not just by civil rights groups but by descendants of other families mentioned in the hidden documents, families who had also been dispossessed. The HOA board crumbled. Mr. Davies resigned first, a timid whisper of a man unable to withstand the pressure. Mrs. Jenkins tried to hold on, but the sheer weight of the scandal and the mounting legal threats forced her out. Mr. Harrison, the granite man, remained defiant to the end, but the legal tide was overwhelming. The state attorney general launched a full investigation. The HOA was frozen, its assets scrutinized, its power dissolved. A special receiver was appointed to oversee the community's affairs. Sterling Heights, once a picture of suburban bliss, became a symbol of systemic injustice and its long, dark shadow. Property values plummeted as the news spread, creating a housing crisis in the once desirable neighborhood. The community pool closed, the block parties ceased. The very idea of Sterling Heights, its perfect image, was irrevocably shattered. A family's name, Petrov, once whispered in hushed tones of injustice, was now part of the public record. Linked to a historic wrong that had finally seen the light, I had achieved my goal. The HOA, the symbol and perpetuator of the fraud, was destroyed. Its leaders were exposed, facing legal ruin. But as I looked out at the familiar, now fractured streets of Sterling Heights, there was no triumphant feeling. Only a cold, quiet sense of completion. The debt was collected, but at what cost to the place I now lived? The dream of Sterling Heights was dead, replaced by the grim reality of its true legacy. And for all the justice served, the community was left in shambles, its residents grappling with the bitter truth of their tainted foundations. There was no clean slate, only a scarred landscape. Honestly, what a bunch of spineless, greedy bastards. You get HOA boards trying to control your paint color. But this level of systemic corruption, disguised as neighborhood preservation, is just next-level evil, using explicit racism as a legal fail-safe to keep descendants of the original landowners from ever reclaiming their stolen property. That's not just a flawed foundation, that's a malicious, calculated move by generational thieves. And the fact that Harrison had legal opinions buried deep, showing he knew exactly what he was protecting, just underscores how utterly depraved these people are. This isn't just an HOA, it's a criminal enterprise that should have been dismantled decades ago. Every single board member who knew and stayed silent deserves to lose everything. They enabled this rot. And people wonder why HOAs are universally despised. This isn't just incompetence, it's a deliberate act of perpetuating injustice for personal gain. The whole historical record argument was always transparent BS. But to find out it was a direct cover for a generational land fraud, with built-in racist clauses to ensure no one from the dispossessed families could ever come back, that's some serious supervillain-level scheming. And the rest of the community? Yeah, they wanted the racist clauses gone for optics, but how many of them truly cared about the underlying truth until it directly impacted their property values? This entire place, from the board down, sounds like a cesspool. Glad it imploded. Let them all deal with the fallout of living in a lie. Typical. Alex pulls off the ultimate revenge, exposes the decades of fraud and systemic racism baked into the very foundation of this idyllic community. And what's the end result? The HOA gets nuked, sure, but everyone else who lived there, who were maybe just trying to raise families or retire in peace, gets screwed over with plummeting property values and a shattered illusion. It's poetic justice for the crooked board members, absolutely, but it's a harsh dose of reality for everyone else caught in the crossfire. No happy ending for anyone, just a broken community left to deal with the rubble of someone else's historical crimes. This isn't a victory, it's a scorched earth revelation that leaves everyone holding a piece of the toxic legacy.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.